Hey, how's everybody doing? I pray that everybody's doing well. Listen, today I want to deal with this subject of fatherlessness, which many on the right have been basically criticizing black fathers for years, blaming them for the conditions in the black community. But what they failed to mention is structural and systemic racism. And this is what I want to deal with today. I want to deal with what actually caused fathers to leave their families and what caused the destruction of the black family. First thing we want to do is go in prayer. Father, again, I thank you for this platform, and I pray, Lord, that this information is beneficial and informative. In Jesus' name I pray. First thing I want to do is I want to give you some information that I researched. Some of the information that I looked at dealing with white women, 14% of white women are single parents, 47% of black women are single parents. Let's talk about that. There is a reason for this. Okay? It's not that white women are more moral than black women, but white women do not have to deal with many of the social problems in the black community. Now, what's interesting when I hear a lot of these numbers come out, and it just occurred to me today, nobody has talked about a lot of the single women, white women who became single during the Civil War and after the Civil War because their husbands were killed in battle. But yet, you want to talk about what's going on with black women. I never heard a discussion of when a lot of the white men went off to World War I, World War II, and even Vietnam, who were killed in battle. And a lot of them were made widows and single parents. But they want to have the conversation. We want to focus on single black women and, of course, black fathers who they consider to be deadbeat and absent. But let me tell you this, because this is something you're not going to get on Fox News. According to the Center for Disease Control, black fathers are more likely to be involved in the activities of their children compared with white and Hispanic men. You're not going to get that. In fact, you may not even get it on CNN and MSNBC. But it's a fact. But the media, specifically those on the right, always want to play this image of the deadbeat and absent father as the reason why the black community is in the state it is in. And listen, I also want to mention something about how much money the government is spending on social programs. Because, they like to talk about the welfare queen. When they say welfare queen, they're talking about black women, as if white women never benefited for social programs. We got to have that conversation. We got to deal with the elephant in the room. Now, quiet as it's kept, 20% of the U.S. budget is spent on social programs like Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, etc. But when they talk about welfare programs, it's nothing but a racist trope for black women getting government money and sitting on their behind. And let's talk about when the Social Security Act was passed, okay? The Social Security Act was passed in 1935 by Franklin Delano Roosevelt, okay? Now, let's be clear. Initially, black people did not benefit from these social programs, but see, the right don't want to have this conversation. I'm interested in the truth. I'm interested in the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me God. Black people were initially excluded. So imagine how difficult and hard it was for black people during Jim Crow and the Great Depression. It's amazing that they made it. I believe God helped them get through. I really do. And let's be clear, family, that it wasn't until the 60s that more black people began to benefit from social programs like welfare. But they don't want to mention that since its inception, that white people, specifically white women, benefited from social programs, whether it be food stamps, whatever the case may be. It was white women, not black women. Now, what I want to deal with now is Larry Elders, who was really a mouthpiece or white supremacy. He is a grifter who the conservatives and the Republicans like to push out there to give the illusion that the problem is black men. So I want you to hear some of this conversation, okay?
I know is that right now, it's a little under 70% of black kids are born into a world without a father in the house, married to a mother. Yeah. And at some point, 85% of black...
Okay, I want to deal with that. Now, family, I believe in marriage, and I believe that ideally that it would be better if children were born into a family with the parents married. I believe that. However, if there is abuse in the home, however, if there is no love and commitment, and if the father is not gainfully employed and doing everything he can to be a father, it's not beneficial. Because if a child sees abuse, adultery, alcoholism, substance abuse, it would not be a good environment. It would not be an environment that is conducive for success. Okay?
Kids will be living in a home without a father. 85% at some point.
Oh, okay.
Now, what the pushback will be, I'm on a commission called the Commission on Social Status of Black Men and Black Boys. Okay. Donald Trump appointed me to that commission.
That tells you right there. If Donald Trump is appointing a black man, you can rest assured it is not for the benefit of black people. It is to downplay racism, systemic racism, structural racism, to give the illusion that the problem is black men are lazy and shiftless and they are not in the homes taking care of their children. They're relying on the government to be the father.
It was started by a congresswoman, a Democrat from Florida. There are about 30 people on the commission. Only about 2 or 3 of them are conservative. And I've said to them what I've said to you. And the pushback I always get is this. It is a myth that black men are absent. If you Google the myth.
In many ways, it is a myth. And family, let's be clear. Like I read it to you, according to the Center for Disease Control, black men are more likely to be involved in the lives of their children. And it's been proven that you can co-parent. The main thing is that the children have both their mother and fathers in their lives. Now, ideally, I would love to see the children in the home with both of their parents and they are married and they are loving one another. They are sowing into their children. They are creating an environment that is good and is loving. But we don't live in a perfect world. And let's be honest, we know that a lot of children are a result of careless sex, both black and white. But they don't want to have that conversation. There is a large percentage of white women that are not married. Now, you don't hear about them. Now, the data may say there are more single black women. But there's a reason for that. But we don't want to have honest conversations about that. But the fact of the matter is, parents can co-parent because there are people that are not good candidates for marriage. There are people that would not be good husbands or wives. Now, I do believe if both parents come together, they can co-parent. And that child could grow up well-rounded. Now, I know what Larry would say, it's better if the man is in the home, but if the man is abusive, he's not working, he's on drugs and alcohol, you can be a deadbeat in the home. You can be at home all day not being productive, but you there. And I know that's the argument Larry would make.
Of black fatherlessness, you get a whole bunch of hits. Because purportedly, even though a black man is not married to the mother, he comes over and picks the kid up, spends time with them, blah, 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 blah. Well, if that's true, then how...
But isn't that important? Because to me, marriage, the center of marriage should be Jesus, but it should also be love. It should be love and commitment. And just because you have a baby with somebody, that don't mean you should marry them, because eventually it may end in divorce. So what would be the point of? So now the children have to go through their parents being divorced. But long as the parents are committed to their children and they're not dogging one another out in front of their children, it could be a fairly decent situation. And it may not be ideal, but the main thing is that both of the children have their father in their lives, whether that be during the week, on the weekends, holidays, whatever the case may be, because there are different circumstances. Okay? The most important thing is that the father is there financially and tries to spend as much time as he can with his child.
How do you explain these numbers I just gave you? It's not the same thing as having a father in the house married to your mother, where you see him getting up every day, whether he wants to go to work or not, and you see them responsibly resolving disputes.
And let's be clear, there have been some people that had grown up in the homes with both parents, and they didn't turn out well. Now, the data might say children are more likely to do better if both parents are in the home. And that could very well be true, but it is not a guarantee. Because there have been some children have grown up in some dysfunctional homes. But see, Larry on the right, they don't want to have that conversation. Family, we have to be honest.
To making decisions in an adult way. Without seeing that, that's the problem. So, again, we incentivized, made it easier for women to have a child without a father in the house.
Okay, now we're going to start dealing with how the government actually destroyed the black family. And I know where Larry was going with that. I really do. I really do. I know where Larry was going with that. He's getting ready to blame the federal government. And the government did contribute to the destruction of the black family. Ain't no secret. There is no secret. If you do your research, you will discover the government played a big role in the destruction of the black family. All you have to do is do the research. Ain't no secret. So I want you to hear this documentary. It's some very good information.
Fathers have left home in order for their children to get meat and bread. There are so many dehumanizing elements in the welfare system that we are concerned about removing. Ultimately, we are concerned about a guaranteed annual income. And the other thing I think it is very necessary.
This is Dr. King.
Everybody's on welfare in this country. And when it comes to black people and poor people, we just call it something else. And for white people and rich, we call it subsidy.
White people and rich, they call it subsidy. And they never talk about welfare for corporations. But see, when you hear welfare, they're talking about black people, specifically single black women. But we don't want to have that conversation.
It's no secret, fatherless households are more common in the black community. A survey from the American Consensus Institution revealed that 67%.
And we got to deal with why is it more common in the black community? Family, this goes back to slavery. And some would argue that the black family was more intact during slavery than it is today. And that's not necessarily true. Because first of all, even the marriage, the jumping of the broom was really not a certified marriage. They didn't go before anybody. And the fact of the matter is, those black families knew that any moment that a husband, a so-called husband, a so-called wife, or the children could be sold at any moment. There was no stability. Now, if they were lucky or blessed enough to have a slave owner who allowed those so-called families to stay intact, then, you know, they were able to have some semblance of family. But family, by no stretch of the imagination, was their stability.
Percent of black children under 18 in the U.S. live in homes without fathers. This is a stark contrast to white children, as only 24% of them live in fatherless homes. But it wasn't always like that. The black family survived generations of open racism.
Generations of open racism. Jim Crow. And let's keep in mind, family, that a lot of black men could not get jobs during Jim Crow. Now, there were times when the white men went off to war, some black men were able to get those jobs. But guess what? When they came back, those white men got their jobs back. And black men were unemployed, or they were forced to do low-wage, menial jobs, which prevented them from taking care of their families properly.
Spread poverty and slavery. They lived through segregation and violence, and strong family bonds used to be the norm.
As of 1960, 2/3 of all Black American children were living with both parents.
2/3. Now, family, I will admit that things got better, but they were not perfect. Keep in mind, this was still Jim Crow era, before Lyndon Baines Johnson signed Civil Rights Bill, which made things better. Now, I do believe black men always wanted to be with their families. White men don't have a monopoly on that. But when you don't give black men jobs, put them in a position to take care of their children and be married to a wife, it's difficult. When you're not given a decent job with benefits, when you're not allowed to move in a decent community with a decent school, it's almost near impossible. But see, we don't want to have that conversation.
That declined over the years until only 1/3 were living with both parents in 1995. So it's not the legacy of slavery that destroys the African American family.
It's the legacy of the welfare state.
And see, that was a white man talking to a black conservative grifter, Thomas Sowell. And lately they've been digging him up because he is also a mouthpiece of white supremacy. He also blames the government and black men for the conditions of the black family. And that's not necessarily true. Because see, family, the one thing that they don't want to deal with is the illness itself. They like to deal with the symptoms. But see, in order to cure the illness, you have to deal with the illness itself. Now, black men being unemployed and not being at home with their children in many ways is a symptom of a deeper problem. Because if you give a black man a livable wage with benefits, he'll be in the life of his children. And in many cases, he'll marry his woman.
Between 1890 and 1950, the marriage rate was much higher among black women than white women. A fraction of black children...
Much higher. I wonder why. Like I said, I believe for the most part, black men have had a mindset to be married. Now, I must admit over the years it has changed. We have to realize that social issues have changed. The mindset of people have changed because there are a lot of young people today, they don't believe in marriage. There are a lot of women today that feel like, and especially those who are educated and have good jobs, that they don't need a man to have a child. Now, I don't necessarily agree with that, but I do understand. But you have to understand the mindset. It's not the 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s. It's a different effort, different mindset, okay? But they don't have the conversation.
lived in homes without their fathers. But everything changed with the expansion of the welfare state. It divided the household and created a dependency on welfare. This kind of reminds me of what President Reagan...
Divided the household, created a dependence on welfare. And you're going to be listening in a few minutes how the government forced the black man out with the no man in the house rule. But the right don't want to have that conversation.
Reagan said,
I've always felt the 9 most terrifying words in the English language are, I'm from the government and I'm here to help.
Well, you know Ronald Reagan, if you know anything about Ronald Reagan, he was an avowed racist, a bigot, one of the worst presidents when it comes to racism for black people. But see, they don't want to deal with the government helping black. The government has contributed to harming black people. But they don't want the government to help black people. Dr. King even talked about, you can't just harm a black people for years and then free them and not give them some form of assistance. Because black people always just wanted a fair and impartial opportunity. Nothing more,
So,
nothing less.
what happened? What's the mechanism? Here is a detailed look at how the welfare state played a role in the dissolving of the family structure over the
Here
years.
it comes.
People say that the breakdown of traditional family units, family structures, is a byproduct of Black poverty, not just because there is no man to support the family financially, but also because women tend to earn less than men on average. Of course, the connection between the two is there, but it goes deeper than that. Welfare was a mean little business. It was designed to get people by in a pinch.
And family, let's just be honest. Like I said, welfare was really designed for poor white people during the Depression. It was years later that Black people started benefiting from it. So when Black people finally started benefiting from it, it became a problem. But let's be clear, Black people always wanted to be self-sufficient and independent and have a job. So if Black people are not given jobs and opportunity, what are they supposed to do? Just be homeless and starved? So the government, just like with the white people, had an obligation to try to help Black families as well. But see, when Black people started benefiting from it, then it became a problem.
Public assistance programs, like welfare entitlements, have been a part of American culture since the 1940s. Unfortunately, like in many other aspects of government institutions, Black Americans were left out.
Black people were left out, like I said. It wasn't until years later. So just imagine what Black people had to deal with during their times while white people were getting these benefits. Black people were not. They were left in slums, didn't have jobs, and I'm not going to even talk about redlining. Okay, that's a different conversation. But just imagine not getting a hand up or a hand out just to survive.
Time, Black people could also get financial support, but it wasn't easy. Mothers who applied for checks had to let social workers inspect their homes to see if their conditions were suitable for welfare.
Could you imagine the humiliation? If you have not seen the movie Claudine, the movie Claudine will give you a visual of what Black women had to deal with these social workers coming in, inspecting their homes to see how they were living and see if there was any indication of a man being there. Could you imagine the humiliation?
Workers also had to make sure no man was living in the house. But even if they qualified for support, the amount they received was meager and not enough to build a stable life.
It was chump change. And I still don't know how a lot of those women survived on that little money that they got once a month. But these racist right-wing politicians will have you believe they were living high off the hog. That is not true. It was a struggle. Talk to some Black people who live in those conditions. They will tell you how it was that they barely made it.
In the early 1960s, welfare was not yet common, even in the most impoverished Black communities. In the decade that followed, the number of Black people on welfare went up by 169%. They further increased by 30% from 1970 to 1975. In 1972.
And what that says is that Black people are still shut out of decent jobs. A lot of people, if you meet the criteria of income, you qualify for food stamps and other benefits. And trust and believe, a lot of these Black women, they want to work. They want to have a good job where they can take care of their children, even if the father is not there. But because of conditions and circumstances, they had to apply for government aid just so their children can have a fairly decent meal. Now, if it was up to the right, they wouldn't have that.
New York City, almost 1 out of every 6 residents was on welfare. A major portion of these households were Black. Although Black people were only around 1/10 of all Americans, they made up almost 50% of all welfare recipients by the late 70s. A recent UNICEF report showed that many children under 18 in America struggle financially, and African American children are nearly 4 times more likely to be in poverty.
14 times more likely to be in poverty. I want you to get that. And the main reason is systemic racism. When you do not give people jobs and opportunities, they're going to be poor. They're going to be struggling. And you don't have to have a degree in finances to understand that it's going to be hard to take care of a family on minimum wage. it's just going to be next to impossible. So you're going to have to resort to public housing and nickel and dime jobs and trying to get some form of aid.
Than white children, though the number of families receiving cash assistance has decreased since 1996, child poverty rates for black children in the U.S. remain high. This outcome is not by accident. I studied the evolution of social welfare policies in the U.S. from the New Deal to the 1996 reforms, and found that these policies have been discriminatory from
the get-go. But they don't want to have that conversation.
start, and a lot of people can confess to that. This led many black families to fall into cultural and economic ruin. In a short period, healthy black people started relying on government assistance to achieve some level of normalcy, but
Some level of normalcy. Black people don't want to go on government aid. They want to be self-sufficient just like white people in any other group. Any man with common sense, he want to be able to have a job. He want to be able to have a home. He want to be able to have a decent car. He want to be able to take care of his children. But if you put things in place to prevent him from doing it, what you think he's going to do? What do you expect him to do?
within the city slums, that normalcy was impossible to get. Black children barely knew their fathers, and most were raised by unemployed and unmarried mothers stuck in a cycle of poverty and modest paychecks. This marked a significant shift in Black American history. The consequences were severe for the next generation. Let's start with the Social Security Act of 1935. It was introduced during Franklin Roosevelt's administration. It was designed to create the safety net in the country, safeguarding families from losing their income. It was viewed as a significant part of New Deal reform and paved the way for federal protections in the future, such as the Affordable Care Act and Medicare. This policy had two main parts. The first part had social
And folks, Black people did not initially benefit from this. Let's be clear. They did not initially benefit from this.
insurance programs that provided financial support to dependents of deceased or incapacitated workers, and Social Security for retired older Americans. The second part comprised means-tested public assistance programs, initially known as Aid to Dependent Children, and later renamed Aid to Families with Dependent Children. In 1962, under the Kennedy administration, ideally, it was believed that as the overall quality of life in the country improved, more families could support themselves without
More families could support themselves. And the families they were referring to was white family. It was not Black families. Let's be clear.
needing financial assistance from the ADC program. Eventually, the ADC program would become unnecessary and gradually phase out on its own. But this posed a major problem for Black Americans. Like any other component of the New Deal, the origins of the Social Security Act were deeply rooted in racism. During the 1930s and 1940s,
Deeply rooted.
Black people had to deal with widespread racial discrimination in the workplace. They held low-paying jobs, often paid in cash and off the books. This made them ineligible for social insurance programs. The ADC program was an extension of state-run programs that supported widowed mothers, but mostly benefited white widows.
Mostly benefited white widows. Let's be clear.
The states decided eligibility and need, and since the separate but equal doctrine was in place, Blacks were still excluded from fully participating. Jim Crow laws and the separate but equal doctrine led to a system with different services for whites and Blacks. But as we all know by now, they were far from equal.
Are you getting it?
States made efforts to cut down ADC enrollment and costs. They proposed residency requirements to prevent Blacks from the South from qualifying for the program. In 1935, there was a hearing on the bill, and the NAACP
And let's be clear, folks. Politicians made decisions, passed laws that contributed and put Black people in the condition that we're still dealing with today.
an organization that fights for civil rights, expressed their concerns. Southern politicians wanted to exclude agricultural and domestic workers from the bill. This meant that many Black workers couldn't get the support they needed. This exclusion would particularly affect Black sharecroppers and cash tenants, who were already struggling to make ends meet. Even though the NAACP was highly against it, the Social Security Act was approved. That's why 65% of African Americans nationwide were not eligible for benefits, and
We're not eligible for benefits. Did you get that?
an even larger percentage of these Black families in the South were excluded from the program. In the 1950s and 60s, things got even worse for Black families. Welfare checks incentivized single-mother households, and there was one rule that ruined it all: the man in the house rule. Black
The man in the house rule. This is the point I really want to get to. The government stipulated that a black family could not get benefits if the black man was in the house. So instead of trying to keep the black family together by telling the black man, we want you there with your family, but while you're there, we still want you out looking for the job. In fact, we're going to help you get a job. We're going to put aside some money for you. You can go to school. You can learn a trade. We're going to do everything we can to help you. But you must, if you are healthy, physically and mentally, actively seeking employment. But no, they didn't do that.
Black families have long been the victims of income inequality and bad government policies. The irony, of course, is that conservatives pushed black mothers to break their families to get welfare. But
Conservatives. But Larry don't want to hear that. The right don't want to hear that. Donald Trump don't want to hear that. Fox News doesn't want to hear that.
before 1968, many states and administrative agencies created and enforced the man in the house rule. This rule basically meant that if there is a working or healthy man in the house, the government can't help you. And they would go as far as to send welfare workers to visit
You get that? I really want you to get that.
the homes without warning to check if a man was present. If they found any evidence whatsoever, families lost their welfare benefits. Over the years, the welfare state started dissolving the family structure, slowly but surely.
Slowly but surely, dissolving the family structure.
A man who can't get a decent job and provide a substantial income suddenly believes that his family is better off without him. So, if a man were to lose his job, he literally had to leave the house so his children could get government surplus peanut butter, beans, and cheese. On the other hand, if either the woman or the man, or both, were irresponsible, they faced no consequences for their actions. And it was the taxpayers who ended up paying for it. These things aren't exactly...
So listen, family, I just wanted to get on here a few minutes because I'm getting tired of hearing this fatherlessness narrative by Larry Elders and others. I wanted to give you some truth because it's always good to know the truth, and then you have to decide for yourself. But the fact of the matter is, the problem in the black community is not fatherlessness. Fatherlessness is one of the symptoms of a deeper problem. The problem is structural racism. So listen, if you get an opportunity, I want you to check this video out fully. It's called How the Government Destroyed the Black Family. It's very informative and beneficial. So listen, I'm going to go ahead and end this video. And listen, please subscribe to the channel. Like the video and share with others. Okay? I'm going to go ahead and end with prayer. Father, again, I thank you for this opportunity to present some information that would be beneficial and informative. And I pray, Father, that everybody who has an opportunity to see it would benefit from it. And this I pray in Jesus' name. In the meantime, stay up and stay informed. God bless you.